Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another video for History by Podcast. Today I am joined by Professor Wendy Doniger, and today we're discussing her book, What is an American Girl in India? Letters and Recollections from 1963 to 1964. So, what is this about? What are these letters and recollections that you're discussing? Um, and why did you decide to publish it? Because it's a series of letters that you found decades later after you composed them, and you decided you wanted them to publish them.
Well, it's a good question. I wrote these letters. The book's called An American Girl in India. So I wrote these letters when I was 22 and 23 years old in 1963 and early 64 when I was in India. I just had finished my BA. I hadn't really embarked yet on my PhD, and I got a grant to go to India for a year. And it was my first time really away from home. I went to Radcliffe, but I drive back home to Long Island on the weekends practically. So I'd always been very close to my parents. I wrote a book about my parents that was published around 5 years ago called The Donigers of Great Neck, about what interesting people they were and how close I was to them. So when I went to India for the first time, I was really overwhelmed by it. It was my first trip abroad, really, and India in 1963 was a very interesting place. And so, in order to take field notes in a way, I had my little Olivetti typewriter with me. So I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and sent the letters back to my parents. And then I returned from India in 1964, and I forgot all about them. My mother died in 1991, and the house was full of things she had saved and kept, and I was overwhelmed by them. Never really noticed the box of letters. And then in 2018, I retired from the University of Chicago, and I had to clean out my office, and I found this box, and in this box were these little blue air letters where you had to fold over the flaps and so forth. And I picked one up, and it said, Calcutta, December 10th, 1963, Dear Mommy and Daddy. And all the letters were addressed, Dear Mommy and Daddy. And some of it was just, home stuff. Did you get my letter? Please send me some more toothpaste. I'm out of Tampax. I've sent you a package. Did you get that kind of boring stuff? But some of it was not so boring. Some of it was my impressions of India at a very interesting time, of the religion, of the people I met, of conversations, of living in the countryside, of living in the city. So when I picked the letters up and saw the box, I started reading them, and I was simultaneously proud of myself and ashamed of myself. I was proud that I was a good observer and there were some interesting things in it, but I was ashamed of my privilege, the reference to places we'd stayed and the opera and the Overseas Press Club. And because I was homesick, I was always comparing things to things I knew from my own past, which was the past of a Jewish American princess. And I'd never seen poor people in the streets. I'd never been to Harlem. I've been to New York many times, but I'd never been to Harlem. I'd never seen dead people. There were dead people all over the place. I'd never been begged from. And my reaction to these things were the reactions of a spoiled American child. I was simply appalled. I really couldn't deal with it. And so there were parts of the letters I really thought no other human eye should ever see. And yet some of them were really quite interesting. I told some stories I heard, which became the basis of books I wrote 30 or 40 years later. That same story stayed with me all those years. So my first impulse was, well, I could publish some of them. I really edited it very carefully. And I took it to my wonderful Indian publisher, Ravi Singh, who published The Hindus and stood by me through all that tumult and shouting. And I said, I think I could publish some of them, but I'd have to cut most of it out. And Ravi said, no, don't cut it out. Leave it in, but apologize for it. So I would put in footnotes when they're actually mistakes of fact. I said, that's not the way the story goes. I told it all wrong. But I also put a preface to each of the letters saying, this is where I'm reacting like a Jewish princess, this is, and so forth. So there's a conversation between the letters of a naive young girl and the 82-year-old woman I was then, saying, goodness, the things I thought then. So it's not just a personal record, but it's kind of a record of how all of us as scholars of India changed our ideas. There's a lot of Orientalism in the book. I wouldn't call it racism, but an attitude that there's difference between Black people and white people in India and how that difference plays out, which I would write differently today. It's still there, but I would write. So it becomes a conversation between someone then and someone now. And it's a pretty accurate, aside from these enormous errors I've made from time to time, it's a pretty detailed and interesting record of what India was like then. The book has been published in India. It's about to be published in America in the beginning of August. But it was a great success in India, not because anyone was crazy about me or the writing or any of that, but because India now, like America now, is a place that many of us are very ashamed of and very worried about. And for people of my generation, it's good to look back on, I don't know, World War II, where we saved the world from Nazis and so forth, and compare that with our attitude toward immigration now and so forth. And even our understanding of what racism there was in World War II, which we weren't aware of, and we were celebrating ourselves as heroes. So in India, too, in 1963, it was just after the British had been kicked out. They had a new country. The country was not yet in the grip of this overdeveloped capitalism, which is ruining the countrysides and ruining everything. There was openness to strangers. You go anywhere, people invited you into their houses, come have a meal, be with us, and so forth. So I think Indians now like to read about how that country was then. And that's one thing that you could get out of the book. For me, publishing it in America, I wanted my students to read it and to see what I was like when I was their age, and the kind of mistakes that I made in India compared to the different mistakes that they make in India now. You always make terrible errors when you go to a really different culture. So that's what the book is about, and that's why I decided that it was worth publishing. And it has been proved worth publishing in India, and I don't know what Americans will make of it, but it'll be a different sort of an audience. But I'm glad I published it.
So what led to your decision to study the Hindu culture, study Sanskrit, and become a professional historian in Hindu religion, history, and culture?
Well, it began when I was really quite young. I was raised in a very liberal and anti-religious, I would say, Jewish family. So we were Jewish. Hitler was our problem. We knew some Yiddish. We called Jewish jokes, but no one in my family would be caught dead in a synagogue. Absolutely. If we went to a Seder, it had to be somebody else's Seder. And so I was raised in a very non-religious household, but I was interested in religion. I had Catholic friends. I would sneak off to mass with them and so forth. I thought, there's a religion, boy. If you want a religion. And then my mother had always wanted to go to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And we had no money for original art in those days. My parents were very poor. So we had rubbings from Angkor Wat that she had framed and put up on the wall. Pictures of the churning of the ocean from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and Ravana and so forth. So that was there. And my mother gave me a book by Rumer Godden of stories, Indian stories for children. And then I somehow or other got a hold of a copy of A Passage to India, which I thought was fascinating, the E.M. Forster book. and of a translation of the Upanishads. I now realize it was a very bad translation of the Upanishads, but so I began to feel that although Judaism had disappointed me in my search for answers to religious questions, questions like, why are we here? Is there a God? What happens when we die? Things that I think thoughtful children often wonder about. But Judaism didn't have answers for me. The kind of Judaism I knew didn't have answers. I now know there's more to Judaism than that, but certainly the Judaism that was offered to me had none of those answers. But India seemed to have some answers. People seem to have been thinking about the questions I was thinking about. And then it suited my personality. I loved the excess of it. I love bright colors. I never wanted to wear gray or brown. I wanted to wear purple, or purple and orange together. And if you wore purple and orange together, they said, what are you, a gypsy? You going to the circus? But an Indian woman could wear purple and orange. That was considered just sort of a normal set of colors for a sari. And I loved the way Indian paintings had lots and lots and lots of things, not just one person for a portrait, but horses and trees and people and all of that. And I loved Indian food. And I loved that you could eat with your fingers. I always hated using a knife and fork. And in India, you could use your hands. I just sort of liked Indian culture, what I got to see of it, the brightness of it. Then when I was in high school, I studied Latin. And my high school was a good high school, but it didn't offer Greek. But my Latin teacher was fresh out of Teachers College, Anita Lilienthal. And she offered to teach me Greek, just on the side. She came over on Monday nights, and my mother gave her actually a very bad dinner, and afterwards we said it. And then I liked that the alphabet was different. Latin, you had to write in regular letters, but Greek, you had alphas and betas. And she said, well, if you like a different alphabet and if you like Greek, you might like to learn Sanskrit someday. And I said, what is Sanskrit? And she said, well, that's the language of ancient India. So the idea of the language got into my head. So when I was 17 and applying to colleges, I applied to Radcliffe because Radcliffe was the only place where an undergraduate woman could study Sanskrit in the United States. I was interested in Swarthmore and Reed, but I couldn't go there. They didn't teach Sanskrit. So as a freshman, 17-year-old freshman, I started the study of Sanskrit, and with it, the study of India, Indian texts, Indian stories, Indian religious ideas. So I never looked back. I never veered away. I knew where I was going, as the saying goes.
And when you first traveled to India, how was that experience for you?
Well, it was wonderful and terrible. It was terrible because I got very sick. I eventually had both amoebic and bacillary dysentery. And I actually had to leave India early. I didn't spend that full year. I wasn't there all of 1963 and 64. I was there for part of 1963 and part of 1964. So I was sick a lot. And I was horrified by the poverty. I was horrified for the beggars. Everyone said, you can't give to them. You can't give to them. So I thought, how can, these people came, they had held up a child that had no arms and legs. It was something just horrific. And you wanted to give them something, but if you did, you never got out of that square. Everyone wanted some. So you learned quickly that you actually could not give money to these people that were begging them. And I never got over that. Even when I went back to visit India in later years when I was old and tough, I hated being begged from by people who were obviously in such terrible need and not being able to give them the money they were asking for. I made up for it. I donated to Hindu charities. I took care of my conscience in other ways, but the human encounters were horrendous. The sight of poverty, the sight of death, the sight of disease. From a little girl from suburb of Long Island, North Shore of Long Island, it was quite a different world. So that was the terrible part. A shock I never really got over. But at the same time, it was so wonderful. especially when you got out of the city. Calcutta was a hard place. And Calcutta in the early 60s was still completely overwhelmed with people who fled partition, who'd come down. They were living in the streets, homeless people you can't imagine. Even today's rather appalling situation of homelessness in American cities is just nothing compared to what that was like. But when you got into the countryside, it was quite different. People were not rich, but they lived under decent circumstances. They dressed, they were clean, they had their children with them. Shantiniketan, which is where I studied in the Bengal countryside, was in a beautiful place. There were rivers. The little boys came driving the cows home in the evening, just the way they did in the Krishna mythology. And Shantiniketan was a good place for me to be. My Harvard professor had sent me there. He thought, you'll be safe there. It was a great university started by the Tagore family, and it maintained the Tagore traditions, but it was also a kind of a finishing school for upper-class Bengali girls. And it was safe, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A little bit upper class. It was a good milieu for me to relax in and to recover from the shock of the city. And I made friends there and learned Bengali there and studied Sanskrit there and learned songs. I learned Manipuri dancing, which is much easier dancing than Bharatanatyam. I had been a dancer, so I wanted to learn dancing, learn songs, learn poems. It was an idyllic existence in many ways at that time in China. And then I traveled through all of India. Kathmandu, went down to Madras, went to the carvings and Kailasa and so forth. So I had a chance to tour all of India as well. It was a wonderful year. And I wrote about it. I wrote.
Why did you try to avoid telling your parents about the illness that you suffered when you first went to India?
Don't you always lie to your parents about how sick you are? I mean, first of all, you don't want them to lock you up and send you to a doctor and all that kind of stuff. You want to go on with your life, even when you're sick. Second of all, if you love them and they love you, you don't want to upset them and worry them. There's nothing they could do. I was doing what I could in India. Oh, I lied to them about all sorts of things, but I certainly lied to them about how sick I was. I did that all my life. I lied to them about how sick I was. But in India, I thought maybe they would come and take me home again. Who knows what they would have done if they had known how ill I was. I also lied to them about kind of dangers I was in. I didn't tell them about all the cobras that were in the bathrooms at Shantiniketan. Other experiences, driving alone in the night to the outskirts of Calcutta in a taxi with two enormous Sikh drivers in the front seat. There were dangers and there were dangers. So no, I always, shall we say, protected my parents from full knowledge of any dangers I was in. That was just standard procedure. And India was simply an extreme case. I didn't want that to be the record of my time in India. I wanted to record the good things. I wanted to say these are nice people I've met. These are happy experiences. These are beautiful things I've seen. Even in writing my books, I have not dwelt upon the ugliness of Indian history or even the ugliness of the Hindu mythology. I've always liked writing about the more hopeful things, even in dealing with caste or the treatment of women, which are real problems to this day in India. I liked finding stories where some people were doing something about caste or doing something about women. There are people who were objected to the mistreatment of the lower caste or the mistreatment of women. I always did look on the positive side. I tried to find something positive. It's just my nature. And it wasn't hard to do in India. There were many wonderful things in India. You didn't have to write about the bears. It's just that I kept thinking about things. I couldn't forget them.
And what are the aspects of the Hindu religion and mythology that fascinated you so much?
Oh, so much of it. I loved the multiplicity of it. I liked that there wasn't just one God. It seemed to me not only to make for much better storytelling, but it seemed to me better to account for the world. It just didn't seem to me that the same guy could have made the slums and the Rocky Mountains. It seemed to me those were two different agendas. I wrote about that. That was actually my second book. It was my Oxford DPhil dissertation, The Origins of Evil in Hindu Mythology, the way that Hindus account for evil, suffering and injustice, which seemed to me to make much more sense than the way that Christians do, simply saying that the sufferings of Jesus is the way that we deal with the sufferings of the world. It seemed to me that that was an answer, but I thought it was not as persuasive as the Hindu answer. So I was always interested in the ways that Hindus accounted for death and suffering and injustice, and I still think that their ideas about it are as good as any ideas get. It's a insoluble problem in a way why there should be so much evil in the world. But I like those stories. I like the funny stories. There's a lot of humor in Hinduism. Another thing I like about it. There are a lot of jokes in the sacred texts. There's a lot of playfulness in the sacred texts. I like that. I liked the detail. I liked all the animals and all the people and all the flowers that got into the mythologies. It's like miniature painting with millions and millions and millions of things. Every story is like one of those miniature paintings with enormous detail. So I liked the way they handled the big questions, the question of evil and so forth. And I also liked the way that they dealt with smaller problems like lying and adultery and misbehaving children, bad dogs and scheming, plotting cats. And it just seemed to me they had a sense of humor in their religion. The stories were wonderful. So I liked Hindu storytelling. I liked all the ways they put detail into their imaginations of the way the gods might be and the way animals might be if they could talk. I liked the Hindu imagination very much.
And my closing question, what did you find intriguing about the Hindu god Shiva?
Oh, Shiva's amazing. Shiva is still the god that I think best accounts for the universe. He's very complicated. He's not simple. I like that no single aspect or story could account for him. He's not simply merciful. He's not simply cruel. He is a dancer. He is beautiful. He is sometimes dishonest. He's powerful. He's the Lord of animals. He's the Lord of the dance. Most of the things that I cared most about, the Hindus felt came from Shiva in some way. Lord of animals, Pashupati, care about animals. He's the Lord of the animals. Lord of the dance, Natharaj. He was the sexiest. He was the most interesting. He was the naughtiest. He was the most complicated. He was the most paradoxical. He was this and that. He was night and day. I thought the sculptures of Shiva were by far the most beautiful of all the Indian sculptures, both the bronze and then the stone sculptures they actually found in the temples of India. Wonderful. I thought he was the most beautiful, beautiful sculptures were always the sculptures of Shiva. Lord of the drama. He's sort of the liveliest and most interesting and most artistic of the gods. most beautiful, the handsomest, the sexiest. There's just all the things that one really likes best in one's favorite people, and would like to think that God had to the nth degree. That's what Shiva has. He's also cruel, and therefore you don't need another God to account for the way the world is.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Wendy.
Thanks for asking good questions.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.